Well, welcome everybody to episode 2 of Winging It, a presentation brought to you by Community Podcast. Okay, this won't translate well into the UK from what Rob just did.
Yeah, that'll be bad. I am not a crook.
So I am joined by my fellow co-host, Robert Bogue.
Hello.
And my name is Eric Shupps, and Winging It is where Rob and I talk about, well, whatever comes to our mind, but typically something around the Microsoft, SharePoint, Office 365 related space, some cloud, some AI, some whatever topic we decide we're going to do this month. So glad you all could join us. A reminder, this cast comes to you two ways. One, via our video stream on our YouTube, our Facebook channel, also on our podcast. It's on all the popular podcast platforms once a month. So be looking for it on your favorite platforms. If you are on the YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe so you get notified when new episodes are posted every month. I don't know if there's a way to do that on podcasts. I'm sure there's some way to be notified when you get a new podcast. So whatever it is that you do that.
Yeah, do that thing.
And also, we'd love to get your feedback. So if you have ideas for future episodes, content you'd like us to cover, questions that you'd like to get answered, we're happy to make up answers on the fly for you. So please post that over to our YouTube channel. You can also, a lot of people don't know, we do have a website at communitycloudcast.com that you can go, and each one of the episodes is presented sort of a blog type of post format. So you can comment on that and leave us feedback and let us know if there's things you'd like us to cover. Or things you'd like to see us go more in depth on, or hey, if you're heading to a conference sometime soon, and thankfully we're back to doing conferences really and in person. If you're heading to a conference that you know will be at, so one of the Microsoft conferences, or it's sort of become Rob's doing the US conferences and I'm doing all the European conferences.
Yeah, we split the world up.
I think we do.
We just split it.
But if you're going to be someplace where we are, drop us a line if there's something you'd like to chat about while we're there, and we'd love to see you and talk to you and have a conversation. So with that, first thing we want to do, of course, is thank our sponsors for these episodes. Aptigent, of course, being a primary sponsor both for this and the regular Community Cloudcast. As mentioned last month, I had a new big release for Salesforce in January, so please do go check that out. We have some exciting new stuff coming down the pipe. Last fall, we launched the PowerSpark offering, which is more of a software plus services for enterprise customers. Be sure to check that out at aptigent.com and keep an eye on the space for some really cool stuff that Rob and I are both working on that'll be coming to you very soon. So our topic for this month, Rob, is just something small, right, that we can't spend much time talking about, and that would be that 5-letter word, search.
Yeah, so just Google it. All right, that was a short episode, huh? How many? So seriously,
I love when a vendor becomes a verb.
Yeah. Well, so how many times do you hear that when you're going to, somebody comes to you and they're like, hey, we need your help implementing search. And like, we want it to look and work just like Google. And do you remember the Google search appliances?
Wow. Yes, I do.
Yeah. Right. Like, and they sucked. Sucked. Because Google fundamentally works on inbound links, and in your intranet, most of your links do not have that kind of inbound links. And so the ranking engine had nothing to work with. Do you remember? So we're doing the history section of the show. Do you remember Mondosoft, that used to make a search software?
Yeah.
They had a screwdriver. It was one of their giveaways, and it was a screwdriver, and they called it the Google Search Appliance Removal Tool.
I never saw one of those. That's awesome.
I'll send you one. I've got a couple. But yeah, so search is kind of, it used to be really competitive, right? There were lots of people trying to play in that space, and I think it's changed a little bit. So when we talk about search, when you think about search, when do you start thinking about it? Do you start thinking about it the 2003 timeframe or the 2007 timeframe?
Yeah, 2007 really. Although we were obviously working with it in '03 and even before that with I forget what the code name for it was before that, but
Magma.
when we started playing with it, and Microsoft's had no less than who knows 50 different versions of search over the years. It's gotten out
Yeah.
of control. But that's when I started thinking about search in an enterprise context, right?
Yep.
Like how it applied to content you have distributed across the organization, and more than just I'm going to go look in a folder for something, right, or look for it on my desktop. Before that, I guess I don't know, maybe I just really didn't even think about I didn't think about it beyond a specific product implementation, right? So
Mhm.
some products had, if you were doing the early days of things like Documentum and whatnot, you had in search inside of those products, right? But outside of a product, I guess I just didn't think about it at all.
Right. Yeah, me neither. Like it wasn't you had search inside, and you had, your applications allowed you to search inside of a field, but you didn't have this concept of, oh, I'll go find it for you. And I think we've come a long way, right? Like, because those original builds of like 2007, they would give you everything and the kitchen sink, and the guy who put in the kitchen sink and his mother and their grandma, like, I don't want that. I didn't even use that word. Yeah.
Yeah, and you couldn't filter effectively, and we didn't have the concept of result sources. And I think we did have in 2007, we did have like keywords and um
We,
something else we had. Keywords,
well, we
there
had
was some,
properties, right? We did have
yeah,
properties.
managed properties. We had the managed
Yeah,
properties
yeah,
and we had the keywords, right?
yeah.
But you didn't think about, so nowadays, well, let's say from the 2010 wave on, there became people who just specialized in search, right?
Right.
Agnes and Matt are the first ones, of course, that come to mind. Agnes Molnar and Matt McDermott, and that's what you did. You did search, right?
Right.
But before that, you turned it on and it sort of kind of worked, and you just lived with it. But nobody thought about tuning it or making it better.
Well, right, because nobody had the experience of wanting it or needing it. Like the content corpus, we're not really growing that much yet. And then as people started using it and getting disappointed with the behavior, they went, maybe we can do better. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, maybe we can do better.
And
So, but
as you say, we are in a better place than we were then, but we've gone through a lot to get here.
yeah, there's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah, mostly tears, I think.
Yeah, mostly tears.
So we went from sort of this inbuilt search engine to we had SharePoint search plus we had fast, right?
Yep.
For those of you that aren't as old as we are, and who don't know what fast is, it was a Norwegian company. Were they from Norway? I think
Yeah, I think
Oslo.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they had developed this really cool search technology that Microsoft ended up buying, and then it was a separate standalone offering. And then some of that came into SharePoint, and then it all came into SharePoint, and then Fast just went away, and it was a search engine. But at the same time, you had Windows desktop search, and you had Bing search, Google, and we had search all over the place everywhere, and none of it talked to each other. None of it worked the same.
Right. It all was implemented differently, behaved differently. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I actually have from CompTIA an INET Plus certification. Now, people will have to look this up because it's in the history bucket, right? But I have this, and what it was effectively how to use Yahoo or Google to search the internet. Like half the questions were, what happens if you use a minus sign? What happens if you use quotes? And I'm like, really, this is the certification? Yeah. Wow. This is when I was doing a lot of certification work. Wow. So, yeah, but that's actually a good point, right? Like, so all the basic fundamentals now behave the same, whether you're in Google, Yahoo, Bing, SharePoint, insert thing here. If you put a minus before a term, it excludes it. If you put quotes around a set of words, it treats them as a single unit. Mm-hmm. If you put a plus in front of it, it says, no, seriously, this has to be here. Mm-hmm. And there's some of those basics that I'll tell you I still use today. In fact, the property mechanism that we use with the colon, right? Like, so you can enter the name of a managed property, a colon, and then a term, right?
Mm-hmm.
I still use that on Google. If there's a poor search implementation on a public website, I do site colon, site URL space, whatever I want.
Mm-hmm.
And Google will limit your search. Bing will do the same thing to just that domain. So you can find that thing that they're making difficult for you to find. But we had all that stuff since 2010.
Well, and then we went from search being totally unsophisticated and just a bucket of a mess to search being overly sophisticated, where there were so many buttons and knobs and dials, and then you had to learn KQL, and then we had things like the content query web part, or the content search web part, where you can then tune these search filters and get all this stuff. And then we started developing against search, right? Of course. And then, it was hitting the search service, or it was hitting the SQL databases, and one of the few SQL databases we could query directly from code. And it became this monstrosity that sort of took over everything.
Well, do you remember search-based applications? That was a thing for a couple of years.
Was.
Right, where everybody's like, we're going to use search as the basis of our application. And I said, great, you go do that someplace that's not close to me, because I can already see the mushroom cloud. And what people have to understand about search and the way that it behaves, and this is true of anything, right? Like, this is SharePoint, Microsoft centric search, but search works. You save document, search looks at document, indexes document, puts document contents into its indexes, right? And in the old days, there were several delays in that. The first one was you'd set a schedule, and it would only crawl every X number of minutes, right? And it could be hours, it could be whatever. Now we have continuous crawl. It's one of the enhancements. So basically, as you record the content into the database, there's a trigger sent over to search. Hey, by the way, this just updated. Go work on it. And that's super cool. The other thing we had was index propagation. And I know both Eric and I have lost many a night on index propagation.
Yeah, indeed.
Where you had one machine that was crawling it, and then it had to copy it to the other machine that was answering queries. And it mostly worked some of the time. So you've got this, you index it, took some time, and then copying takes some time, and so people were building these search-based applications, and I'm like, this has disaster written all over it. And they're like, oh, no, it's no big deal. The time's fine. I can't tell you how many users I had said, I just entered this record and I can't find it. I'm like, give it a minute or 10.
Yeah. And if you just entered it, you should know where it is. Stop it.
Right. And, but the users, they didn't want that, right? Like, they wanted that positive confirmation. Hey, your stuff's here for real. You just can't see it right now. So it's we have a lot of innovations, a lot of things that have come forward since the beginning. But I think the fundamentals in a lot of ways have changed. I think we've taken off a lot of the rough edges, but not all of them. One of the other things that I know Eric, but our listeners may not, is index corruption. So you have a big corpus, takes a long time to crawl. So you do the incremental crawls in the middle, so that doesn't take so long, right? Magically, elves came in and they trashed a couple of bits, and now your index doesn't work. It can't find stuff, or it just fails, and you have to do a full index. One of my clients, literally, it took them 5 weeks to index their content.
Yep.
We re-architected that. That was broken. But with 5 weeks, now think about this. Like, you're used to getting stuff right within an hour, right? But then the index blows up and they have to go re-index, and it takes 5 weeks for it to work, right? And nobody put up with that. Nobody. Like, they're like, I'm done. I can't trust search. And I will say, so we still have sort of that problem even in SharePoint Online, in the cloud, Microsoft Search, whatever we want to call it. But it's much, much better because what Microsoft does is it goes, oh, let me just throw a whole bunch of resources at that to get it done much, much faster. So you still occasionally see those problems, but at least the resolution is a little faster. So.
Well, by the same token, so search got really complex.
Right.
There were so many moving parts. You needed a dedicated person to work just on search who understood how to deal with all these issues and how to allocate your resources appropriately so that you have query nodes and index nodes and then you have index partitioning even beyond that so that you're driving disk and
it has its own topology. It wouldn't even provision correctly from the user interface. You had to use PowerShell.
Yep.
Because it was the only way you could actually get search provisioned. Yep. That's how complicated it was.
Yep. It either ran on a single box or you had to do this arcane stuff with 8 gazillion PowerShell commands to get it to work. I remember it taking me probably the better part of a month to get all the PowerShell scripts written and tested to deploy search properly in a way that was properly enterprise ready and repeatable. We still had to tweak it from time to time to get it to work. But part of being which it just took so long because it didn't work. You had to tear it all apart, right? Yep. Wait for all that to finish, then reprovision it. Then you had to get some sort of index in there. Yeah, a mess. So we went from having all. I think search, like if you go back to the 70s and if you're the sound engineer at a rock concert, right, you have this board, right, that's bigger than my truck, right, with dials and stuff and everywhere, and you had to know what each one of those did, and you had to know all that to make search work effectively. You had to be able to run the board,
right.
And then we went to the cloud, and we take all that away, right? Give yourself a handful. It's almost like I've got a Stream Deck here in front of me. It's like the cloud search is now a Stream Deck, right?
You have 3 buttons.
2 buttons you can push,
right?
And they don't even light up properly.
Right.
And then we did the worst thing humanly imaginable. We combined the two into hybrid search.
Right.
Where your index then lived in the cloud, surfacing results from on-prem.
Mm-hmm.
And then you were in the cloud getting results from on-prem that you couldn't click on to get to because you weren't on the VPN. And oh my God, what a mess.
Yep.
Now, it hadn't gotten any better at finding things in the interim.
Right. Now I will say, so there is a use case for that, right? Like, so a lot of people implemented it and it broke and there were frustrated users. There are definitely some use cases for that in terms of building a true content services and allowing you to index across multiple repositories. The implementation's bad if you have to be on VPN to access the links that it's crawling, but there are reasons why that can be a very positive thing.
Well, and it's not just the VPN issue; it's also the authentication issue, right? Because you authenticate one way to Azure AD and another on-prem. Yes, SharePoint SE changes the server SE changes that where you can authenticate with Azure AD, but nevertheless, it not a great story. But to your point, the objective was the right objective, right? To surface one set of search results across multiple repositories. So that kind of brings us up to where we are today, in that we now have this concept that they're trying to push of this sort of unified one Microsoft search to rule them all. And it searches across Exchange mailboxes and SharePoint libraries and Teams channels and all this sort of stuff. And I'm not entirely sure I get where they're going, but I'm not sure the implementation is progress.
No. The implementation is fundamentally broken, and I can prove it pretty easily. So first, let me set vision up, right? So vision is, as you said, all the content sources. But the other thing that's a part of that master vision is in all of the apps you normally use. So it is in Outlook, it is in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, presumably in Publisher if people still use that or whatever. And so the idea is you ought to be able to search from anywhere and get to anything with context relevance, meaning if you're in Word and you're doing the search, it should be able to apply that to your context. The other thing that we should come back to is the work on Delve and social network analysis, which is part of the FAST thing, but I'll come back to that later, or you can. So it's one search everywhere. And it's broken, and I can show you. Open up OneNote and do a search. open up Word and do a search in the search bar all the way at the top. OneNote will not search your actual content. It only searches options inside the menus. Word, however, will search anything connected to your instance, which in some cases can include Bing, right? So you have this disparate experience rather than the unified one that they were going for. I don't think they're done, right? Like, we still have to get our facets, which I'll let you explain. We have to get facets through a PnP project versus core code, something that Microsoft releases. So I think they're still working on it, but I think the vision is right if implemented correctly. But why don't you tell people what facets are?
Well, so in search, you have this concept where I guess we have to go back and talk about word breaking and how it actually gets content out, right? So you have a target, a Word document or a text document or PDF, doesn't matter what it is. And so the word breakers are going to go in and they understand how to open that file type and process that file type. Well, that's all well and good and it gets put in an index, but you have to categorize that somehow. You have to make that all relatable so search will know when you're searching for something, what you're looking for and how to weight it. And so that's relatively flat, right? Well, it's not three-dimensional at all. So you can't have one set of concept, one key term and sort of pivot it and look at it a different way. And so what a facet does is it allows you to apply context to the search term, but really we're talking about the index repository when we talk about facets.
Right.
So, you're looking at applying context on top of that so that when, to Rob's example, you're searching in Word, how does it know that you're going to look for stuff inside of a Word document? That's a no-brainer. It ended with a Docker or docx extension, right? It came from Word, or actually it's the XML type application that it gets. But it's Office, right? So I'm also going to expose content from Excel and PowerPoint and OneNote, right? That's a facet, right? Office would be a facet. It's not a category that you applied. It's sort of an implied metadata, right, that the system has created. Now, there's some level of control. Managed properties are really creating facets when we get down to it to a certain degree. But to be a true facet, they'd have to be able to relate to each other. So it could be three-dimensional.
Yeah. So you talk about managed properties. So search crawls a document, identifies properties in the document. Those are called crawl properties. For them to be searchable, separate from full text, they have to be defined in a managed property. And so what you do is you do a crawl, so you get the crawled properties because they're magical in the way that they're defined. You define the managed property, and then you grab the crawled properties and you connect it, right? In SharePoint Online, we have a problem though, in that those managed properties have to have a special little bit set for them to be to be refinable, to be used as a refiner. And if that bit isn't set, you can't use it as a refiner, except you can't set the bit in online. So they actually have a hack where you have refinable string 00, refinable string 01, which you then have to map these properties to, and you've got to do the stuff, right? But when you do that all right, or you use one of the out-of-the-box ones, like Eric was talking about, then you can start to say, I've done a search for foobar, and the file types, like Eric was talking about, it's a Word document, it's Excel documents, whatever. I can click on that, and it collapses out my results, so I just see whatever it was, Excel. You can also do those on your own. So if author's also an out-of-the-box one that is refinable, but I built a Gutenberg library. So the Gutenberg library has all these books that are public. So I downloaded them all, and then I used web services to categorize them all to either their Library of Congress classification system or their Dewey Decimal system, and I put that all in metadata. Then I went in and defined those as those refinable string, blah, blah, blah. And now when I get results, I can actually get results with Dewey Decimal codes and Library of Congress codes to allow me to filter things out. It's not a beautiful example, but imagine this now as your product lines, or imagine it as divisions or something like that. And term stores, which we talked about last time, Imagine what you can do when you can start to just filter stuff like that, and it prompts you for what to filter. The last little bit about refiners, and then we probably should come back and talk about federation. The last little bit about refiners is it only shows you the values which are already contained in the search results. So the file types, if it only shows up in an Excel file and Word, it's only going to show me Excel and Word. It won't show me PowerPoint, OneNote, PDF, and all the 15 other file types it knows. So that helps users quickly get to the answer they want. We talked very, very early on about how we got too many results. Well, these refiners allow us to kind of click in and shrink those. So, but Eric, the other thing we started talking about when we started talking about hybrid, because hybrid is effectively a federated, it's a unique case for federated search, but maybe you can share federated search in the open search web parts. Was that what they were called?
Oh, yeah, I forget what they were called, but yeah. So when we talk about search as an overall concept, those of us who are of a SharePoint mindset, sort of the old school mindset, think of all of our content being inside of SharePoint, and so we start thinking in terms of site collections and document libraries and manage metadata and all this stuff. But in the enterprise world, so much of our content is outside our collaboration system, and it's on file shares or it's in another file repository or something. And so there's an entire set of protocols that enables these repositories, just put them under a general term and call them repositories, to connect to each other and become searchable so that you can search whether you've got the aforementioned, hopefully easily removable Google search appliance or some other search mechanism that you have. I seem to recall there being like it wasn't a Yahoo. There was another type of search appliance that was a web-based search. I forget what it was that you could put in the enterprise, but you sort of spurred me thinking about that. But you had these different search mechanisms, and you wanted to be able to search from SharePoint, or I want to search from Documentum, or I want to search from FileShare. Put all these together. So SharePoint has this concept of federated search, where you could search other repositories and bring that data back. And as long as it had a crawler mechanism, some sort of connectivity mechanism, and almost all of the document management providers had some sort of federated search capability, whether it's a web service. A lot of them were SOAP-based web services, but whether it's a web service or some open connector or whatnot that you could go and do that. And so SharePoint had a list of these it knew. You could create custom ones as well. You could map properties that came in from these federated resources. Where that got you into trouble, and where I see that we haven't learned our lessons from the past, is that you'd have structured stuff in one system that didn't match the type of structure you had in another system. So these facets that you were creating by defining refiners and managed properties and whatnot, which is really what all a facet is just a sort of a dynamically assigned set of search results, right? That's user driven and programmatic. Suddenly you had totally different classification sets. And so your refinement meant nothing because you couldn't refine across these sets, or you got stuff from a file system that had no properties to whatsoever, and you couldn't refine against it. So federated search was this great idea that brought together all this, yay, we've got all our stuff in one place, but you still couldn't find anything.
Right. It was still very difficult to find stuff because the other thing that happens is, so one of the things that hybrid solved, right? So good and bad. So one of the things that hybrid solved was the corpus inconsistencies. You're like, what the heck is that? The score that you get for the relevance of a document is relative to all of the other documents in the corpus, in the set of data. And so when we were doing federated, we'd have foobar. We'd look for foobar, and in one set of data, it'd be very high because it was unique and it was in all the right places and it knew all the right people. And in another one, it'd be very middling. But this corpus over here, because of the way it is shaped and structured, it could elevate this one to show up above the other one. And so we ended up having to kind of, like, we had buckets, right? We had a bucket A, we had a bucket B. This is from SAP, and this is from your custom app, and this is from SharePoint. And And we've not really gotten past that. The mechanism that Microsoft Search allows you to do is you have these plug-in connectors, as Eric was kind of talking about, this hybrid search environment where you index the stuff locally, it copies the index up to the cloud, and then the way that it is issuing that query is all Microsoft Search. And it's unified across all of the different sources because all the different sources are actually in the one big master search corpus, which gets us back to, we also have those crawl time issues, because even though Microsoft may throw a huge amount of resources at re-indexing your content if an index breaks, you can put a lot of load on a back-end system if you try and do that. In fact, the way that we used to test websites, I don't know, you and I have ever talked about this. The way that we used to test websites is we would unleash Mondosoft onto the website with no restriction. And so Mondosoft was one of those third-party things, right? Like it would immediately ask for 1,000 pages simultaneously. And I knew if the site didn't fall over dead as the search started, I was good. No user's going to issue 1,000 requests simultaneously. But yeah, so federated has been a cool, it's a cool thing. I think it has a role to play because some repositories you can't search inside of SharePoint Search, right, or Microsoft Search. And ultimately, what the users want, and we talked about this a little bit in the last show, is they want their document. They don't care where it is. That's not a point. They want their document. And how do you create an experience that allows them to navigate to their document? And that can be hard, right? It can be harder than you think it would be.
Yeah, and it's still hard.
Right.
I was at Ignite a few months back. The first one they had brought back in person in Seattle, which was good to do, to have something in person. Implementation left a little bit to be desired, but there was a lot of this talk about Microsoft Search, and how you're going to have one search in Windows that's going to search everywhere. Okay, fine, but you're back to the federated search problem, right? Where it's not all going to be ranked the same. And and there is, to be fair, a lot of work going into that whole corpus inconsistency problem and how they solve. They're doing a tremendous amount of work, and fair play to them for doing it. They're certainly doing more work than I think a lot of the other vendors are doing around that space. So good on them for it. But it's very difficult, and you run into this classic problem that we've always had with search, in that web search is a popularity contest. Enterprise search is a metadata contest, right? So, or I shouldn't say that. I should say it's a relevance contest, right? Whereas web search is a popularity contest. So there are two fundamentally incompatible methodologies. How do you bridge those into one search mechanism that's functional? And I'm excited to see where they're going. I know they're applying some Azure AI stuff to that too, but I just don't know how you bridge the gap.
Well, I think so. I think this opens the opportunity to come back to the conversation about Delve and social network analysis and that stuff, and how they apply that to search. So first of all, one of the things that Fast had as they were purchased was this idea that there are relationships between people. And it was very early on. It wasn't completely fleshed out, but it was a good idea. What Microsoft 365 does for you is every time Eric emails me something and I click on a link, every time we're in a meeting together, every time whatever, Microsoft uses those as signals. And once the signals get strong enough, there's enough of them, or they're strong enough signals, then it says there is a relationship, and it defines the relationship between Eric and I. So you add this, plus your organizational hierarchy and a few other things, right? And you get a way of knowing who's related to Rob and who's related to Eric. As it turns out, when you search, you typically want things from people you know. And so what search is doing is it's elevating the search from the results when they're connected to you, right? And it's a simple thing, but it's some of those simple things that actually drive real value, right? If you look at Google versus Yahoo, it's just one idea. It's the idea that the things that are referred to the most frequently, the ones that have inbound links, in their case it was research, the things that have the most inbound links are the things that people most likely want to get to. And so when you apply things like social network analysis and who's close to me, therefore who am I likely to be wanting content from, I think you can start to continue to improve relevance. I'm with you that some of these problems are not easily solvable. But we talk about searching on a PC. If you connect that to people are now moving towards these synchronized file stores, there's not much left on your PC to actually index. Your desktop, in an ideal world, your desktop is synchronized to OneDrive. Your documents are synchronized to OneDrive. The amount of actual content on your machine that isn't also in the cloud is getting smaller and smaller.
One, then you have the BYOD problem where I'm a Mac user, right? I'm not using Windows Search to surface that content. I'm using SharePoint. I'm using Teams. I'm using Office applications, right? I got more Microsoft software on my machine than I got anything else. But nevertheless, I need a way to get at that content. Well, I can't Spotlight search it because that's a Mac thing. Where is my search interface? Does searching in Word then invoke everything that's in that graph connected experience, right, for search, right? Does it bring all that together? And then how does that impact? Well, no. I just wanted to search my Word documents, right?
No, I meant find this word in the document itself.
Yeah. Right. So we've gone from, I think, overexposing some of the controls and whatnot to underexposing some of the controls. Although, to be fair, there's a lot of stuff you can tweak in the admin center for search. There's a lot of dials and things you could control. Certainly not what we used to be able in the past. But now you have these uncontrollable federated resources that are just automatically surfacing results. I had a conversation with a client recently where they're talking about surfacing news content and articles, and how the way that Viva does it does not fit their organizational profile. They don't care. They don't want to expose. I shouldn't say they don't care. They don't want to expose content based on who you know or who you are connected to or who you work with on a project. They want to expose content that has high organizational relevance. And Viva has no concept of that because it's piggybacking off the more Dell related type protocols. Well, it's still the same basic Dell stuff under the hood.
Yeah.
And then the big question then also becomes, how does that interact with syntax where you're taking all this contextual stuff?
Right. Well, and I think that's exactly what I was going to say, is that for topics that syntax knows, those are going to be prioritized. Right. And so you have an organization that doesn't necessarily want to connect people with the stuff they already know. If it's defined as a topic in syntax, then those will be prioritized in search by default. And that gives you a way to say, if you're searching about XYZ project, I send them to the project homepage or to the program manager or whatever it is. But yeah, you cannot tune search the way that you used to. There's lots of little issues. Now, I will say that the treatments they've done in Word in particular about when you do a search, it's like in this document, in your sites, in settings, and there's these little horizontal bars that kind of separate those sections, and that's nice. But you certainly don't have control over it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how well that works in certainly in the bigger enterprise context about not being able to control and
right.
And we're not talking about permissions. Permissions are a whole separate thing that's already handled in the background. But this is actually targeting that, focusing that content that you want users to have access to in a controlled manner. I think that's what sort of did Delve in, or the initial implementation of Delve. It was just random. It seemed random. Intelligent if you understood the algorithm. You go, oh, That's cool. It found that, but from a usability perspective, it was all over the map.
Right. So Delve, and by the way, delve.na.microsoft.com for the folks in North America, it's still online.
Mm-hmm.
It shows you documents that the other person has worked on. So I could go look at Eric's profile, and I can see the last 5 documents that Eric's worked on. Asterisk. I see them if I have permission to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that freaked a lot of people out because they would go, oh my gosh, they're seeing everything I do. No, they're seeing everything you do that they have permission to. And 2, they don't actually see everything you do. They really only see a subset of it based on connectivity. So, but people got really freaked out. I don't want my boss knowing that I'm working on my resume. And my answer to them was, then put it someplace your boss doesn't have access to. Do not put it on the public share. That's not a good place to put it.
So let's talk about going forward.
Yep.
We have this sort of one Microsoft search thing coming. It's in progress now, really. How do we see the search experience improving in Office 365? Because we have this extra wrinkle that Teams keeps becoming this disruptor and everything, where we want to search for content around document, but then we also want to have access to the conversations that are related to that document or piece of content or what have you, and that's all over in Teams. So how does that play into the fact?
Well, and let me make it even worse before it gets better. We now have Viva Engage. We have Yammer, right, which is another Microsoft big acquisition from a decade ago. Not quite. And the situation with that is you're now comments, conversations, documents, and they've got to find a way to get that into the user interface. And I think they're not there yet, right? Like they simply don't know how to make those results all look pretty. I think the thing that we'll see in the next, and I'm going to say 4 years, is the user interface around search is going to get a lot better. It jumped from, I think it was 2013 timeframe when we first started getting file previews. Mm-hmm. And those kind of enhancements, I think we're going to start to see again in how do we surface this? So do we surface, I found this in this comment, but the comment is related to this document, and I'm going to show you how you can kind of navigate through these relationships. Same for a Teams channel, right? Like here's the actual comment, here's the channel, here's the team, here's the document that was referred to, right? And they've got to figure out how to make those modifications happen. By the way, I actually I misspoke earlier. I assigned the social network stuff to Fast, and it wasn't. It was actually Yammer.
It was Yammer.
That stuff came out of Yammer. But it's really cool stuff, right? So, yeah. So, what about you? What do you think where do you think that this is going to move?
Well, I think, unfortunately, I think we're going to continue to see a fractured experience for the user until someone gets their head around how to do that. And I almost think it's an acquisition or an external party that comes in that looks at this as a totally different way and sparks an idea. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's a good thing, right? Bringing in external ideas sometimes and getting a fresh perspective, I think, is good. But I think that's what it's going to take to change this mindset of how we've kind of done to ourselves about how we present and codify results, and also how we're going to have to overcome this document versus site versus Teams chat versus search web. I don't know how we're going to bring all that together, but someone has to come up with a way to make that user friendly in a way that it exposes stuff that people want. And maybe we go to a certain degree, we go back to giving more controls to the administrators to tweak and define that we go back to some level of search specialty. That's probably unavoidable. But you go too far and it just makes it too hard. So I don't know over the next few years that this conversation becomes clearer, or that the end result gets a whole lot better. And of course, once again, let me point out this is not endemic to Microsoft. We happen to know this space the best, but this is true across all platforms.
Mhm.
Right? Nobody has a good answer to this. And unfortunately, it's the legacy. Search experts are probably the worst at it because of the way that they've traditionally approached it.
Right. So first of all, there are only three engines, internal search engines left. There's SharePoint/Microsoft. There's Solar, and there's Elasticsearch.
Elastic, yeah.
And that's it. And you can go, no, LucidWorks or whatever. It's a derivative of Solar. We're down to 3, right? It's not quite Highlander, but it's getting there. So these are the endemic problems. And you call out Teams specifically, and it's fair to call out Teams. I think the other thing that's got to happen is we have to rebuild the discipline of information architecture. We have to have people who know how to organize stuff in ways that leads to repeatable, predictable results. And I got to tell you, Teams has never had an information architect. They don't know what they're doing as it relates to information architecture. And if you don't believe me, take a look at the goofy mechanism they use for listing your teams. You cannot organize them in a hierarchy. If you want to click on a team, it doesn't actually take you to a page that's useful about the team. It expands and collapses the channels, which get auto-hidden on you along with the team itself. So when you're trying to find the team that you actually need to go, you have to go through the list, which is not even in alphabetical order. So I think I can stand well affirmed by the evidence. They have no idea what information architecture is. And if it ever knocked on their door, they'd shoot it.
Yeah, that's a fundamental problem there. But again, to bring up the other platforms, it's no better in Slack or Chatter or pick your platform. Heaven forbid you want to find something in Salesforce, right? That's not a traditional customer record that's in their wheelhouse, right? Use Salesforce files and try and find something. Forget about it. Not going to happen. Or try and realistically find all the conversations related to a particular customer account by key. Right? That's not the customer name.
Right. The thing is, I think for those of us who've been doing it for a couple of decades now, we expect full text search of unstructured documents. We expect it, right? I should say unstructured content, right?
Yeah, true.
We expect it. But in other places, they don't even expect it. Salesforce, they don't even expect it. What do you mean you want to find the correspondence where we said the word foobar? Like, you're going to click every single document, buddy, right? They don't even think that full text search makes any sense. They're like, I know Google exists and I would like to see it in my Salesforce experience or my SAP experience, but I don't expect it.
Yeah, the expectation is, put that over in AWS and use Elasticsearch to find it, right?
Right.
And so it's so the story, because Microsoft is our wheelhouse, and so we can bag on it because we know more about it. The story isn't any better on any other platforms, and that's why this looking forward it's very challenging for them to solve a problem that nobody else has solved either.
Right.
And make this relevant. I'm not sold on this one search experience across all. I don't think that's effective or proper. I think that things should stay at least in some very broad silos with some context around them to understand what you're looking for. I have no expectation of looking for web results when I'm searching for last month's quarterly spreadsheet, right? But nevertheless, that's the direction we're going. So we're going to have to see how they implement it. And I would, at a minimum, like to see since we're surfacing everything in Teams, to have that experience be at least unified between Teams and SharePoint and Exchange, or at least have a unified experience. It's getting there. They're certainly working on it, but it's not there yet.
Right. There needs to be a pop-out experience from the search bars, and that experience doesn't exist yet. So I will disagree with you that I think that people want their content and they don't necessarily know the format it was delivered in or where it came from. Oh, it was shared on a web page, which actually links to the real document, but the term I use is only used in the web page. It's not used in the document because I only saw the web page and then I marked it in my head and went, need to think about that later. That's the term I use. So I think there's some of that psychosocial stuff that mean that we got to go down bad roads, right? Like I'm totally with you. I would totally love for everything to be neat and orderly. And at the same time, I think the way that we're experiencing content now, where it's super fast, we're skimming it, we're like all of those things, if they can get to an experience which understands I'm in Word, look in the document first, look in my site, in my document library next, and then the site, and then expand out. If they can do that and they can get that experience to be a nice experience, I'm on board. But it leaves a lot to be desired right now because it's kind of half or maybe 30% done.
Too true. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Of course, Rob and I can talk about this kind of stuff forever, but join us next month for next month's episode as we pick another gnarly topic to dive into, expand and expound upon. Again, these will be released every month. Look to our YouTube channel and our Facebook. We'll put links up to that. You can hit our website at communitycloudcast.com and comment there. Please feel free to leave us feedback. Give us suggestions for future content that you'd like to have covered, or just questions that you have that we can answer, or at least at a minimum, we'll make up an answer.
Yeah, I mean, at least 5% of them will be right. Right? Accuracy, minimum 5%.
Well, we're as good as search, right?
Right. Well, better than search. Seriously, though, do reach out to us if you've got a topic, something that you're pondering, something you don't know how to solve in SharePoint. Happy to talk about those too. Is what would you do if you were faced with this? And we can tell you. We generally will come up with 2 or 3 options that might be interesting, and they'll have a lot of history behind them too.
Yeah, and so we'd love to get your feedback. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we will see all of you next month.